wind howled through the night, its cold fingers prying at the edges of the thin, flickering streetlights. Officer Marie Thompson stood frozen at the edge of the alley, her heart pounding against her ribs, her breath thick in the air. Her eyes locked on the figure ahead, a large German shepherd, barely conscious, its body bruised and beaten, a glint of fear in its eyes. It wasn't supposed to end like this. It wasn't supposed to be a rescue mission, a simple call that would end with the dog lying on the cold concrete, its chest barely rising with each shallow breath. The rain had started to fall heavier now, as if the heavens themselves were mourning the end of something before it had even begun. But there was no time for hesitation. Officer Thompson took a slow step forward, crouching, her hand shaking as she reached out. She couldn't afford to lose this dog. Not now. Not when its future, and her own, depended on what happened next. The dog's eyes flickered up, locking onto hers, the same depth of pain and hopelessness reflected in both their souls. In that moment, she wasn't just a cop. She was a lifeline. And if she didn't act, if she didn't do something now, she might just lose everything. The rain had been falling all night. Its steady patter against the windshield of Officer Marie Thompson's squad a constant reminder of how bleak this city could feel. She had just finished her rounds, the familiar weight of exhaustion settling deep into her bones. She wasn't looking for anything more tonight. The night shift had been long, and the flicker of neon lights reflecting off the wet pavement was beginning to feel like a dull backdrop to her weary thoughts. The streets were quieter than usual, the sound of the city muffled by the downpour. Marie was just about to call it a night when her radio crackled. "Officer Thompson," came the voice from dispatch. "We've got a 1044 in progress. Animal down, abandoned in the alley near Jefferson Street. Possible severe injuries. 1073. Immediate assistance requested." Her fingers tightened around the steering wheel. She was ready to wrap up her shift and head home to the small apartment she rarely left. But this was different. The call was brief, but the words "severe injuries" hit her like a jolt of electricity. She quickly punched the address into her GPS, her heart starting to race. It wasn't just any call. There was something about it. A feeling in her gut, a sensation she couldn't shake off. The familiar hum of the squad car felt distant as she navigated through the rain-slicked streets. The city's night lights, blurred by the downpour, seemed to mirror her thoughts, fuzzy, unsure, and full of tension. As she made her way down Jefferson Street, the alley appeared ahead, dark and empty, except for a shape in the middle of the road. She slowed to a stop, her headlights illuminating a large dog lying motionless. Her breath hitched, and she immediately cut the engine. The rain slapped against the side of her car, but she barely noticed the cold. She grabbed her flashlight, her hands steady despite the pounding adrenaline in her chest. She stepped out into the rain, the heavy water soaking through her uniform as she walked toward the dog. It was a German shepherd, large and imposing even in its broken state. The dog's body was battered, matted fur clinging to its skin in patches, its breathing shallow and irregular. There was blood smeared across its fur and the wet pavement beneath it. The dog's eyes fluttered open, meeting hers for the briefest of moments, the light from her flashlight catching the pain and confusion in its gaze. It was an animal on the brink of collapse, but there was something in those eyes that stopped her in her tracks. It wasn't just fear, it was a plea. Marie felt a pang of something deep in her chest. This wasn't just another stray or injured animal. This was a creature that had been abandoned, left to die in the cold, brutal night. The weight of that hit her like a tidal wave. Her hand hovered above the dog, shaking with both determination and something softer, an overwhelming sense of responsibility. She couldn't just leave it there, not now. Not when its pain and fear were so raw. The rain beat down harder, but Marie felt strangely calm, as if the world had narrowed to this moment, this decision. She kneeled next to the dog, her voice soft but firm. "Hey, buddy," she whispered, her fingers trembling as she reached for the dog's fur. "I'm not going to leave you." The dog's eyes flickered again, a glimmer of something more than just pain, a flicker of hope. Marie's heart clenched. She could see it in those eyes, the desperate need to be seen, to be helped. She wasn't a doctor, she wasn't trained to handle this. But she knew one thing. She couldn't walk away. "Hold on," she murmured, grabbing her radio. Her hands shook as she called for backup, but her voice was steady. "This is Officer Thompson. I've got a 10-4-4 animal down, severe injuries. I need an ambulance to my location immediately. Send help." Her fingers were slick with rain as she held the radio, and the dog's breath came slower now, raspier. She gently reached out to touch its fur, the dog's skin cold and clammy under her fingers. She could feel its pulse. A weak, struggling beat, but it was there. She wasn't sure how long the dog had been lying there alone, but she could feel its struggle to hang on. Marie glanced around, the alley still eerily silent, save for the sound of rain and the dog's shallow breaths. It felt like the world had gone still, waiting. She swallowed hard, her own breath shaky, and she made the decision in that moment to stay with the dog, to be its lifeline. The rain kept falling, washing the dirt and the pain away for just a moment, as she pressed her hand gently against the dog's side. "Just hold on," she whispered again, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm not leaving you." Time felt distorted as she stayed there, waiting for the ambulance, her hand on the dog's body. The rain kept falling, and the night seemed to stretch on forever, but all Marie could think about was the dog and the silent promise she'd made. No one else was coming. She was all the dog had now. And in that shared moment of uncertainty, Officer Thompson and the German shepherd, struggling against everything, became something more than just a cop and an animal. They were two souls at the edge of hope, teetering on the brink of an unknown future. The hum of the ambulance was a steady backdrop to the chaos that engulfed Officer Marie Thompson's thoughts. Titan, the German shepherd she had found moments ago on the edge of death, lay on the gurney in the back, his breathing shallow and ragged. The paramedics worked swiftly, but their faces were set with worry, and every time they checked his vitals, the silent tension in the air grew heavier. Marie's hands were clasped tightly around her radio, her knuckles white, her mind racing. "Just hang on," she whispered to herself, though she knew he couldn't hear her. The steady beat of the ambulance's siren cut through the rain, but it felt like a faint echo in the background of her mind. Titan had been breathing, barely when they loaded him into the vehicle. Now, though, it was as if the life was slipping away from him with every second. By the time they reached the animal hospital, the rain had stopped, leaving the city streets slick and cold. The streetlights flickered, casting long shadows on the wet pavement. Marie followed closely behind the stretcher, her boots splashing through puddles as she hurried into the sterile hospital entrance. The veterinary team was already waiting, their hands steady but their eyes grim. They took one look at Titan and immediately moved into action, attaching IV lines, checking his heart rate and assessing the extent of the damage. They had to work quickly. Titan's body was battered from the neglect, the abuse, and the trauma he'd suffered before she found him. Marie stood at the edge of the room, her chest tight. She couldn't breathe. There was so much she didn't understand. The team was moving with purpose, but there was a fear and uncertainty that loomed. They knew Titan was in critical condition, but it felt like they were swimming in the unknown. Was it even possible to save him? Could someone so broken ever really recover? The head veterinarian, Dr. Lindsay, glanced at Marie briefly, her face set with professional composure, but her eyes told a different story. "We're doing everything we can. We'll know more in an hour." An hour. Marie could barely sit still. She moved toward Titan's side, watching as the vet inserted a needle into his vein. Titan's body jerked slightly at the pain, his legs twitching involuntarily, but he didn't open his eyes. His fur, once thick and proud, now seemed to weigh him down, matted with dirt, blood, and the residue of his broken past. As Dr. Lindsay moved around him, checking his vitals, Marie reached out and placed a gentle hand on Titan's head, her fingers brushing through his fur. Her touch was tentative, like she was afraid he might break under her hand, but there was something in his face, even in his unconscious state, that kept pulling her in. She wasn't just here to save a dog. She was here to offer him a second chance, the chance to trust again, to feel safe again. She wasn't sure why she felt such an intense connection with this animal. but something deep inside her told her this was more than a simple rescue mission. "Is he going to make it?" Marie asked softly, almost to herself. "Doctor." Lindsay didn't meet her gaze immediately. When she did, her eyes held the truth, but she said nothing. Her silence spoke louder than any words could have. Marie's heart sank. She knew the odds weren't good, but there was a flicker of hope that refused to die within her. This wasn't just any animal. This was Titan, a soul that had been left for dead and somehow still had the strength to fight. "I'll be back in a few minutes," Dr. Lindsay said, and Marie nodded absently, watching as the veterinarian disappeared into another part of the hospital. The room was quiet now. The beeping of the machines was a constant reminder that time was not on their side. Marie moved to a small bench in the corner of the room, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the weight of the situation wash over her. The reality was too heavy to hold for long. She had walked into that alley, seeing nothing but a broken animal. But now she was holding on to something more. She was holding on to Titan's fight, and her own. The weight of her own loneliness crept in, uninvited. She had always believed in doing what was right, in upholding the law and protecting those who needed help. But this was different. She could see so much of herself in Titan. She, too, had been through battles that left scars both visible and hidden. She, too, had been bruised by life. The idea of a second chance, of healing from the wounds that time had inflicted, was something she understood deeply now. The ticking of the clock on the wall seemed louder in the silence. Marie found herself standing again, her feet moving instinctively back toward Titan's side. She had to stay. She had to be there for him. She wasn't going to let him fight alone. The beeping of the heart monitor suddenly changed pitch, its rhythmic pulse becoming more erratic. Marie froze, her stomach twisted. She felt the fear and dread curl around her heart. Titan's breathing was becoming more labored. She didn't know what was happening, but it felt like the world was slipping from her grasp. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, don't go." And then Titan's eyes flickered open. They were clouded with pain, confusion, but they were alive. They locked onto hers. There was no immediate recognition, just raw, desperate awareness. But in that brief moment, a spark of connection passed between them. Titan was alive. He wasn't giving up. Marie exhaled sharply, tears welling up in her eyes. She reached down, gently stroking his head again. This time, he didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. "You're not alone," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I've got you." The moment felt like a promise. The promise of a future. Not just for Titan, but for her too. This was no longer just a rescue mission. This was the beginning of something that neither of them had ever expected. Titan's recovery was slow, painfully so, but every day there was a small victory. His heart rate was steady now, his body warmer to the touch, his eyes more alert. He was no longer the lifeless, broken animal that Marie had first found. Slowly, cautiously, Titan had begun to reclaim pieces of himself, but with each small step forward, Marie saw the shadows of his past, not just the visible scars on his body, but something deeper, something far more insidious. It was the second week after his arrival at the hospital when Marie first learned about Titan's past. She sat in the waiting room, her legs crossed nervously, the quiet hum of fluorescent lights overhead doing little to calm her. She had been coming every day, spending hours with Titan, but this day, the shelter staff had asked her to meet with one of the animal handlers, a man named Bill. He had been with the shelter for years and had worked with Titan in the past. Bill looked older than his years, with tired eyes and a hard face. When he sat down across from her, his hands were steady, but his words carried the weight of something heavy. "You've probably noticed there's something different about him," Bill said, his voice low, hesitant. Marie nodded, her heart racing with a mix of concern and anticipation. She had suspected there was more to Titan's story than met the eye. The way he reacted to certain sounds, the way he flinched whenever someone raised their hand or moved too quickly. There was trauma there, something that ran deeper than just physical wounds. Titan wasn't always like this, Bill continued, his gaze distant. He was one of the best K9 officers we had, trained, loyal, fearless. But when he got older, they decided he wasn't useful anymore. Bill's voice cracked slightly as he spoke, his eyes darkening with the memory. He was still a great dog, but they said he wasn't sharp enough, wasn't fast enough. They pushed him too hard, and when he didn't meet expectations, they discarded him. Marie's throat tightened as she listened, the words sinking in like stones in her chest. She had worked with K9 units before, but hearing about Titan's fate, how he had been pushed to his limits and cast aside when he was no longer useful, tore at her heart. She could see it now. The same hurt in Titan's eyes that she had seen in her own reflection in the mirror, the same deep scar of rejection that she had never fully healed from. Her heart swelled with an emotion she wasn't prepared for. Sympathy, anger, and something else she couldn't quite name. Something raw, something deeply personal. Why didn't anyone step in? Marie's voice trembled, the question more for herself than for Bill. Bill sighed, rubbing his hands together. There wasn't much anyone could do. Once the department decides, there's no turning back. Titan was too old, too slow, they said. They didn't care what he'd given. He was just a tool to them. A lump formed in Marie's throat as the weight of his words settled over her. She could feel her own past, her own battles with the system. Echoing through those words, she had worked so hard to prove herself in a male-dominated department, constantly fighting to be seen as more than just a woman in uniform. There were moments when she, too, had felt discarded, like she wasn't enough, like her worth was tied to how much she could perform, how much she could give. She glanced at Titan, who lay on the bed in the next room, his eyes closed, his breathing steady. The physical injuries were healing, but the emotional scars, those would take much longer to repair. What happened to him after they let him go? Marie asked softly, her voice barely a whisper. Bill hesitated, his gaze drifting to the window. He was in and out of shelters for a while. He had a few good homes, but none of them worked out. People were afraid of him, thought he was dangerous. He never trusted anyone after that. They labeled him unpredictable, too aggressive. But he wasn't. He was just broken. Marie swallowed hard. It hurt to hear about Titan's suffering, to know that he had been betrayed by the very people who should have cared for him. It felt too familiar. The way the world could tear someone down, strip away their dignity, until they were nothing but a shadow of who they once were. She stood up, her hands trembling as she ran them through her hair. I don't know if I can fix him, she admitted, her voice tight. He's been through so much. How do you heal something that's been broken like this? Bill didn't respond right away. He sat in silence, looking at her with a calm, understanding expression. You don't fix him. You help him find his way back. It's not about healing the broken parts, Marie. It's about showing him he's worth something. That he's not discarded, not forgotten. You're giving him a chance. Marie's heart clenched as she processed his words. He was right in a way. She couldn't undo what had been done to Titan, just like she couldn't undo the scars of her own past. But she could show him, they could show each other, that there was still a future, still something worth fighting for. And maybe, just maybe, in helping him, she would find the strength to heal herself as well. I'm not going to give up on him, she said, her voice firm, her resolve hardening. Not now. Not after everything he's been through. Bill smiled faintly, a small nod of approval. That's the spirit. But it's going to take time. You both have a lot of healing to do. As she left the shelter later that day, Marie's mind swirled with thoughts of Titan's past and her own. She knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be moments of doubt, moments when it felt like too much. But she also knew that she couldn't let him face his future alone, not when they both had so much to prove. Titan broken but not lost, Marie scarred but not defeated. Together, they would fight for a future where they were not defined by their pasts, but by the strength they found in each other. Marie sat at the small kitchen table in her apartment, a mug of lukewarm coffee in front of her. The room was dim, bathed in the soft, golden light of the early morning. The sounds of the city outside filtered in, distant and muffled, as if the world was still waiting for her decision. The papers in front of her were stark and clinical, a contrast to the raw emotions that had been swirling inside her for the past few days. The K9 unit's offer sat at the top of the stack. They wanted Titan. They wanted him back in the field. They had already started the paperwork for his retraining, and the excitement in their emails was clear. They saw Titan's potential, his intelligence, his strength. They didn't see the broken animal she had found on that rainy night, the dog who had trusted no one. They didn't see the scars, both visible and invisible, that lay beneath his thick fur, but she saw it. She saw Titan's fear of loud noises, his flinch when anyone moved too quickly around him. She saw the hesitation in his eyes, the struggle he had every day to trust again. The last few weeks had been a slow, painful climb toward recovery, but he wasn't whole. Not yet. She wasn't sure he ever would be. And still, the offer was there, like a dangling carrot. A chance for Titan to be something more than a broken dog. A chance for him to be the K9 officer he was trained to be, the dog that had once been the pride of his team. A chance for her to prove that she hadn't failed him, that she could give him the life he deserved. But at what cost? Marie closed her eyes, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. The decision loomed in front of her like a mountain, and she didn't know which way to go. Should she send Titan back into the field, where he could be the working dog they needed him to be? Or should she let him stay with her, where she could protect him, where she could keep him safe? The weight of the question pressed down on her chest. She had spent her life making decisions that affected the lives of others. She had lived her career by the book, always putting the law first. But this was different. This wasn't about the law. This was about Titan. This was about the bond they had built, about the quiet moments they had shared, the trust that had begun to take root between them. She had promised to help him, to give him a chance to heal. Could she really send him back into the world that had broken him in the first place? Her thoughts drifted back to the shelter, to the conversations with Bill. The memories of Titan's time in the K9 unit had weighed heavily on her heart. He had been a star once, the dog everyone counted on. He had been the one to rush into dangerous situations, to protect his handler with unwavering loyalty. But that loyalty had been repaid with neglect, with the cold reality that he had been replaced by younger, more reliable dogs. Marie rubbed her forehead, the tension in her body mounting. She had been discarded once, too. She knew what it felt like to be replaced, to be pushed aside when you weren't useful anymore. She had spent years fighting to prove her worth, to show that she wasn't just a woman in a uniform, that she was more than the label that others had placed on her. She had fought for a seat at the table, and it hadn't been easy. She had made mistakes along the way, sure, but she had always tried to stay true to who she was. She couldn't help but wonder if she was making the same mistake now with Titan. Could she send him back to the K9 unit, knowing that he might not survive another round of being pushed to his limits? Could she live with herself if she failed him, if she pushed him too hard? She had seen the way he flinched when he first came to her, the way he cowered when someone raised their voice or moved too quickly. She had seen the dog that had been broken, not by nature, but by people who didn't care about him, who saw him as a tool instead of a living, breathing creature. But Titan was also strong. He had survived so much, and he had come so far in the weeks since she found him. He had fought to live. He had fought to trust again, and she had seen glimpses of the dog he could be. She knew that with the right care, the right environment, he could thrive again. But would that be enough? Marie looked up from the papers and glanced across the room, where Titan lay curled up on his bed. His eyes were closed, his breathing steady but slow. There was peace in his posture now, a calmness she hadn't seen when she first found him. She had been part of his healing process, part of his journey to reclaiming the trust that had been shattered. But she wasn't sure if she was ready to let him go back into the world that had almost destroyed him. The truth hit her then, clear as day. She didn't want to lose him. Not like that. She had come to care for him more than she had ever expected. The bond between them was real, deep, and she wasn't ready to give it up. Not yet. But at the same time, she couldn't ignore the reality of his potential. The K9 unit was offering him a chance at redemption, a chance to find purpose again, to feel needed and valued. She could give him that. But was she prepared for the cost? Was she prepared to watch him go back into a world that had already failed him once? Marie's mind raced. She had to make a choice. But there was no easy answer, and as she sat there staring at Titan, the weight of that decision, of the responsibility she carried, pressed down on her, overwhelming her like the storm outside. The mornings had become a quiet routine. The rising sun filtered in through the small window in Marie's apartment, casting soft golden light across the room. Titan, now more stable, had taken to his new bed beside the couch, his once battered body slowly regaining strength. Marie watched him as he stretched out, his muscles still tight from months of neglect, his movements hesitant, like a dancer learning to trust their own body again. It was in these small moments that Marie began to see the change. Titan, though still wary of quick movements and loud noises, had started to open up. He no longer shrank when she approached, no longer flinched when she reached to pet him. Instead, he would glance up at her, his dark eyes filled with something she hadn't seen in him before, something close to hope. But there were days when the cracks in their connection were painfully visible. When the flashbacks to his old life resurfaced, when Titan froze in the middle of a simple training exercise, his body rigid with fear, Marie could feel the weight of her decision pressing down on her. This wasn't going to be easy. She had expected challenges, but there were times when she felt the enormity of the task ahead of her, when the weight of Titan's trauma seemed insurmountable. Their first training exercise came on a cool, clear morning, a light breeze rustling the leaves of the trees in the small park behind her apartment. It was a simple drill, nothing too complicated. A few basic commands, a few obstacles. She had watched Titan slowly begin to regain his confidence over the last few days. He would respond to her voice, hesitantly at first, but he would follow her lead. His focus, though not always sharp, was improving. This morning, she felt like they were ready to take the first step toward something more. "Sit," Marie commanded gently, her voice calm but firm. Titan looked at her, his head tilting slightly as if to ask, "Are you sure?" She smiled, her heart swelling with the sight of his unsure, but willing gaze. "Set, Titan," she repeated, her tone patient but steady. The German shepherd hesitated for a moment longer, then slowly lowered his haunches, sitting down on the grass. Marie's heart skipped. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. She knelt down beside him, her hand gently brushing his fur, her fingers finding the familiar, comforting warmth of his body. "Good boy," she murmured. "Good boy." It felt like a small victory, one of many to come, but a victory nonetheless. Titan looked up at her, his eyes shining with something that resembled trust. It wasn't the same trust he once had as a K-9 officer, but it was something. It was a beginning. As the days passed, the challenges continued, and Titan's fear remained an ever-present shadow. During their next drill, a siren blared in the distance. Titan froze, his body tense, his ears pinned back. Marie's heart sank as she saw the familiar signs of panic take over him. The same panic she had seen in him when she first found him in that alley. His eyes were wide, and his breathing quickened as if he couldn't control it. "Easy, Titan," Marie whispered softly, kneeling next to him. She stroked his back gently, letting her fingers brush over the still, scarred patches of fur. "It's okay, it's okay." But it wasn't okay, not yet. He was still scared, still haunted by the trauma of his past. Marie closed her eyes for a brief moment, her hand on his side, feeling his erratic breath. She had expected this. She had known it wouldn't be easy. But seeing Titan so full of fear again sent a pang of guilt through her chest. She had made the decision to take him on, to bring him into her world. But what if she wasn't enough? What if she couldn't help him heal? She took a deep breath, pushing the doubts aside. She wasn't going to let him fail. Not now. Not after everything they had both been through. She leaned in, pressing her forehead against his. "We're in this together," she whispered. "I'm not giving up on you." Titan's breathing began to slow, and after a few moments, he gave a small, tentative wag of his tail. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but it was there. Marie smiled softly, her heart lifting as she felt a flicker of hope. For the next few weeks, They continued their training, each step forward a small but significant victory. Titan's hesitation began to lessen, though his fear would still surface from time to time. But with every command, every successful drill, they built a little more trust, a little more confidence in each other. Marie learned how to read him, how to recognize the subtle signs of his fear, and how to calm him when the shadows of his past threatened to resurface. Titan, in turn, began to trust her more, responding to her voice, following her lead. He wasn't perfect, and there were moments when he faltered, but each moment of progress felt like a triumph. One afternoon, as they practiced walking through a simple obstacle course, Marie watched Titan carefully navigate the hurdles. He moved with more grace than he had before, his body more fluid, less hesitant. There was still a wariness in his eyes, but it was different now. There was a determination there, a will to succeed, and Marie knew that it was because of the bond they had formed. She crouched down to his level, her hands resting gently on his shoulders. "Good boy." "Titan," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm proud of you." Titan's tail gave a small thump against the ground, his eyes softening as he turned to look at her. It wasn't just the simple command that he had obeyed. It was the connection they shared, the trust that was slowly, painfully, but surely growing. They weren't there yet, they weren't perfect. But they had taken the first step, and for Marie and Titan, that was enough. The sun had barely risen, but the morning light filtered through the trees in muted shades of gold and orange, casting long shadows on the training grounds. Titan and Marie stood together in the quiet stillness before the exercise began, the air thick with anticipation. Titan's body was leaner now, his fur glossier, and his movements more confident. He had made incredible progress since that first night in the alley, but today felt different. The stakes were higher, the pressure heavier. It was their first major exercise since Titan had begun his training, and Marie knew it wouldn't be easy. The course was set obstacles, agility drills, and simulated search and rescue situations. Titan had been trained for this before. He was a seasoned canine officer after all, before the trauma and the abandonment had shattered him. Today was supposed to be a test, to see how far he had come, to push him to the edge and see if he could rise above the remnants of his past. Marie's hands gripped the leash tightly, her heart beating in her chest. She had no doubt in her mind that Titan could do it. But there was something gnawing at her, a feeling in her gut that told her this wouldn't go as smoothly as the other training sessions. It was the fear that still lingered in Titan's eyes, the hesitation, the shadows of the past that were never far behind. "Ready?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. Titan's ears flicked, and he looked up at her, his gaze steady but his body tense. He was ready, or at least, he seemed to be. His tail gave a short, uncertain thump against the ground, and Marie's chest tightened. She had seen this before, the brief flash of doubt in his eyes that told her he wasn't sure if he could go through with it. The course began. Titan was swift, his movements smooth and confident at first. He jumped through hoops, navigated tight spaces, and swiftly passed through the agility hurdles. Marie could feel the adrenaline building, her heartbeat steady in her chest. Titan was doing it. He was moving forward, and for a moment everything seemed to fall into place. But then they reached the search and rescue drill, the final challenge. The scenario was simple. Titan had to locate a missing person, hidden in the simulated disaster zone. He had done it countless times in the past, when he was a trained canine officer. He had been unstoppable then. But now, with each step forward, Marie felt the weight of his past hanging heavily in the air, threatening to pull them both under. Titan froze. Marie's breath caught in her throat. He was standing still, his body rigid, eyes darting from side to side as if unsure of where to go. The confident, determined dog she had seen just moments ago was gone. In his place was a dog trapped in fear, unable to move, unable to trust. "Titan," Marie called softly, her voice filled with concern. "Titan, come on. You can do this." Titan didn't budge. His muscles trembled slightly, his breathing shallow. He wasn't just frozen in place. He was paralyzed by fear, by something deeper than the exercise itself. Marie knew it wasn't the drill that had made him freeze. It was the shadow of his past, the echoes of the times he had been pushed too hard, the times he had been abandoned when he wasn't good enough. The trauma was deep, and it was resurfacing. Marie's heart pounded in her chest as she took a step forward, her voice soothing but firm. "Titan, it's okay. I'm right here." But nothing changed. Titan stood motionless, his gaze unfocused, his breathing quickening. Marie's hand tightened on the leash, her own frustration rising. She had known this moment would come. She had known it wouldn't be easy, that there would be times when Titan's trauma would surface and threaten to tear them apart. But she wasn't ready for this. She wasn't ready to see him like this, broken, frozen, unable to move forward. Marie knelt down, her hands gently reaching for Titan's head. She brushed his fur with trembling fingers, trying to ground him, to remind him that he was safe, that she was here. But she could feel the distance between them, the space that had grown in their bond, the invisible wall built from his fear and her own doubts. "Please, Titan," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please don't give up on me." The moments dragged on, the silence deafening, broken only by the distant sounds of the wind rustling through the trees. Titan's body remained still, unyielding. Marie's heart sank. Was this it? Had she pushed him too far, too fast? Was this the breaking point? She had made the decision to bring him back into the world, to give him a second chance. But now, with his fear paralyzing him, she wondered if she had done the right thing. She reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling his muscles tense under her touch. She could see the struggle in his eyes, the war between wanting to move forward and the weight of his past dragging him down. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered, her voice steady despite the torrent of emotion inside her. "We'll take it slow. I'm not giving up on you." Slowly, Titan's body began to relax. His breathing steadied, his muscles loosened just a little. The fear was still there, but it was no longer as overpowering. Marie stood up, her hand still gently resting on his back. "Good boy," she murmured, though the words felt hollow. The moment of triumph she had hoped for felt distant, like an unattainable goal. Titan wasn't ready to move forward. Not yet, but neither was Marie. She didn't know what the future held, or if Titan would ever fully recover from his past. But in that moment, she made a promise to herself and to him. They would take it one step at a time. They would rebuild, piece by piece, even if it meant moving slower than she had planned. She stood there for a long time, just beside him, her hand on his back, knowing that today had not been a success. But it wasn't a failure either. It was just another step in their journey, and that was enough for now. The alarm blared, cutting through the stillness of the morning like a sudden jolt of adrenaline. Marie's heart thudded in her chest as the call came in. Building collapse. Multiple victims trapped. K9 unit required for search and rescue. She didn't hesitate. The words felt like a command, an inevitable pull that she couldn't ignore. Her body moved on autopilot as she grabbed her gear, her mind already racing with the possibilities. This was it, the moment she had been dreading, the moment when Titan's training would be tested under the most extreme conditions. But there was something else in her gut, something deeper than fear. This was their chance to prove that, despite the scars they both carried, they could still fight, still be useful, still be partners. She glanced over at Titan, who was standing quietly beside her, his dark eyes locked onto hers. He was calm, but she could feel the tension in his muscles, the anxiety that hung in the air between them. This wasn't just about saving lives. This was about saving themselves, about showing that they were no longer broken, no longer defined by the trauma that had held them down for so long. Marie took a deep breath, her fingers brushing over Titan's fur as she placed the leash on his collar. He didn't flinch this time. There was a quiet understanding between them, a bond forged in the fire of their struggles. This was it, their first real test. They arrived at the scene, the crumbled building looming ahead like a twisted skeleton of what it once was. The smoke and dust hung in the air, and the sound of crackling debris echoed in the distance. Emergency vehicles were everywhere, fire trucks, ambulances, police officers, all moving in a chaotic dance of urgency. Marie's eyes scanned the wreckage as she stepped out of the car, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. "This is it." "Titan," Marie whispered, her voice low but firm. "Let's show them what we're made of." The moment she spoke, Titan's posture shifted. His head rose slightly, his tail stiffening as he shifted into work mode. There was no time to hesitate, no time for fear. They had a job to do. The collapsed building was a maze of twisted metal and concrete, a nightmare of debris that seemed endless. Marie led Titan into the ruins, the air thick with dust and the scent of smoke. They moved methodically, Titan's nose working overtime as he sniffed the air, his body tense but focused. Marie's heart was in her throat. This was their first time working together in a high-stakes environment like this, and every step felt like a step into the unknown. At first, everything went smoothly. Titan moved with precision, his movements confident as he led Marie toward the first set of trapped victims. His bark was sharp and commanding as he found the first survivor, a young man pinned beneath a beam. Marie quickly sprang into action, her training kicking in as she carefully began to assess the situation, directing the paramedics to the injured man. But then, the ground shifted. A loud crack echoed through the rubble, and Titan froze. His body went rigid, his eyes wide with fear as the memories of his past rushed back to him. The trauma he had suffered, the way he had been abandoned, came rushing to the surface. For a moment, it was as if he was back in that alley, broken and alone. "Titan, no," Marie shouted, her voice filled with urgency. She knew what was happening. She had seen this before. Titan's fear was taking over, paralyzing him. But this time, there was no time to give in to it. The survivors were counting on them. Marie dropped to her knees beside him, her voice soft but commanding. "Titan, focus. We're not stopping here. You can do this. I'm right here." For a long moment, Titan didn't move. His body shook, his eyes darting around the rubble, as though he was seeing ghosts from his past. But Marie's hand on his side was enough. Slowly, he began to relax, his breathing steadying as he looked at her. It wasn't a complete shift, but it was enough. "Good boy," she whispered, the words coming out like a prayer. "Now, let's finish this." They continued their search through the rubble, moving with more urgency now. Titan was still hesitant at times, still struggling with his fear, but with each passing moment, he grew more confident. When they reached another survivor, an elderly woman trapped under a beam, Titan didn't hesitate. He barked sharply, alerting Marie to the danger. Together, they worked to free the woman, and as she was carried to safety, Marie's heart swelled with pride. Titan had done it. He had stepped into his role, his true role, as a K9 officer. The rescue mission continued into the afternoon. And as the last survivor was brought out from the wreckage, Marie and Titan stood together, their work complete. The dust had settled, but there was a weight in the air, a quiet understanding between them that this moment was significant. They had faced their fears, and they had come through it together. Marie's breath was heavy, her hands trembling from the adrenaline and exhaustion. She turned to Titan, who was panting beside her, his body covered in dust, but his expression focused, content. She knelt down beside him, her heart full. "You did it, buddy," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "We did it." Titan looked at her, his dark eyes meeting hers, and for the first time, Marie saw something new in him. It wasn't fear or uncertainty. It was trust. And it was something she had fought so hard to earn, not just from him, but from herself. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The weeks following the rescue mission were quieter than expected. The adrenaline of the operation had worn off, leaving both Marie and Titan with the weight of exhaustion settling in. Titan had proven himself during the rescue, showing Marie just how much he was capable of. But with that success came a darker truth. The battle was far from over. The physical wounds that Titan had suffered were healing, but the deeper scars, the ones no one could see, still lingered, hidden beneath his fur, behind his guarded eyes. Marie had hoped that the aftermath of the mission would be a time of celebration, a moment where she could finally breathe and feel proud of what they had accomplished. But it wasn't like that. Every day felt like a fragile truce with Titan's inner demons. Some days, he seemed like the confident, eager dog she had seen during the mission, focused, determined, ready to work. But other days, the shadows of his past seemed to take over, leaving him distant and unresponsive. Marie would find him staring out the window, his gaze distant, as if lost in memories he couldn't escape. There was a deep sadness in his eyes that she couldn't shake off. It was the same sadness she had seen the first time she met him, a sadness that no amount of training could cure. She would sit next to him, her hand resting gently on his back, and she would watch the same small tremors run through his body. "I know you're still scared," she would whisper, the words soft, almost a promise. "But you're not alone anymore, Titan." Some days, Titan would nuzzle into her hand, as if understanding, seeking the comfort he had been denied for so long. Other days he would pull away, retreating into himself, his anxiety palpable. It was on those days that Marie felt the most helpless. She had promised to help him, to be the one he could trust. But sometimes, the walls he built around himself felt impenetrable. She, too, was struggling. Her own wounds, the ones she had buried deep for years, began to resurface. She had dedicated her life to her work, to proving herself worthy of the badge she wore. But at what cost? As a woman in a field dominated by men, she had always felt like she had to work harder, be tougher, and prove that she belonged. She had faced ridicule, rejection, and doubt, but she had never given up. She had built her career on the belief that if she worked hard enough, she could overcome anything. But now, as she watched Titan battle his own demons, she wondered if that belief was what had driven her to keep going, even when she felt broken inside. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, a reminder from her childhood. "You don't let anyone see your weakness. You fight. You keep going no matter what." It had been a mantra in her life, one that had served her well. But now, with Titan beside her, she began to question whether that mindset was truly the answer. Was it possible to heal by simply pushing through the pain, or did healing require something more? Something she hadn't been willing to give. It was one late evening, as she sat at the kitchen table, staring at a stack of reports she didn't care to read, that she realized the depth of her own struggles. Titan's emotional battles were starting to mirror her own. The constant need to prove herself, to fight for every inch of respect, had left her emotionally scarred, just as Titan's abuse had scarred him. She had spent years burying her pain, pushing it down in the name of professionalism and strength. But Titan had taught her something she hadn't expected. That sometimes, the most powerful thing you could do was acknowledge your wounds and allow yourself to heal. Marie stood up, walking toward the couch where Titan lay curled up, his body tense. She lowered herself next to him, her hand resting gently on his head. Titan raised his eyes to her, and for a moment, the distance between them felt insurmountable. But then, as if sensing her resolve, he nuzzled into her hand, his body slowly relaxing. "I'm here," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We're both here. We'll heal together. You don't have to be perfect, Titan. You just have to try." Titan let out a soft sigh, his eyes closing, and for the first time in a long time, Marie felt a flicker of peace. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't know what the future held for them. But in that moment, she understood something important. Healing was never about erasing the past. It was about learning to live with it, to find strength in the scars that remained. As the days passed, Titan's behavior began to improve in subtle ways. He still had moments of fear, of retreating into himself, but they became fewer. Marie learned to recognize the signs, to give him the space he needed while still providing the gentle guidance that helped him move forward. It wasn't always easy, but it was progress. And for the first time, Marie felt like she was finally learning how to heal herself too. She didn't need to be perfect. She didn't need to have all the answers. All she needed was to keep trying, to keep showing up for Titan and for herself. Together, they were learning to face their wounds, and to heal from them, one small step at a time. The sun had just begun to set, painting the sky in shades of deep orange and purple, casting long shadows across the training field. The air was crisp, with the first hint of fall settling in. Marie stood at the edge of the field, her hands resting on her hips, watching Titan as he paced beside her. It was hard to believe how far they had come. The dog who had once been so broken, so full of fear, was now moving with confidence, his muscles rippling beneath his coat as he trotted alongside her. There were still days when his past haunted him, when the fear would creep back into his eyes, but those days were becoming fewer. He was learning to trust her, to trust himself again. Marie had always believed in Titan's potential, but there was something different now. It wasn't just belief. It was faith. Faith that, despite everything he had been through, despite the scars, he could still be the dog he was meant to be. They had spent months working side by side, learning to read each other, to understand the subtle cues that spoke louder than words. Titan had become more than just a partner. He had become a reflection of Marie's own journey, a journey of healing, of growth, and of rediscovery. The exercise that day was supposed to be routine, just another step in their ongoing training. But as the drill began, something shifted. The exercise had been designed to test Titan's speed, agility, and obedience. But there was an unexpected twist, a sudden distraction, a loud, unexpected noise that caught Titan off guard. It was a noise designed to replicate a stressful, real-life scenario. But as soon as the sound echoed through the field, Titan froze. Marie's breath caught in her throat. She had seen this before, the hesitation, the flash of panic in his eyes. Her mind raced as she watched Titan's muscles tense, his body rigid with fear. This wasn't supposed to happen. He had been doing so well. And now, it was as if everything they had worked for was slipping away in that one moment. "Titan," she called, her voice steady but filled with urgency. She took a step toward him, her eyes locked on his. "Come on, buddy. You've got this. We've got this." Titan's eyes flickered toward her, his body trembling slightly. For a moment, it felt like they were at a standstill, like the years of trauma had come crashing back, like the shadows of his past were wrapping around him, suffocating him. Marie felt a tightness in her chest. Was this the breaking point? Was this the moment when all their progress would crumble? But then something shifted. Titan took a tentative step forward, his body still tight with hesitation, but his focus never wavered from her. Marie took another step, slowly but firmly. She didn't rush him. She couldn't. She had learned that the hardest part of their journey was not pushing harder, but waiting, letting him come to her when he was ready. "Titan, I'm right here," she whispered, her voice full of quiet strength. "You're not alone. We're in this together." The hesitation in Titan's eyes faded, and for the first time in months, Marie saw something else: trust. His muscles relaxed as he moved forward, his body still trembling slightly but with purpose. The noise from the exercise continued, growing louder, more chaotic, but Titan didn't stop. He kept moving one step at a time, following Marie's lead. It was a simple thing, a small victory, but it was enough. Titan had taken that step. He had faced his fear, and he had done it. They both had. The rest of the exercise went smoothly. Titan moved through the course with ease, his agility and focus sharper than ever. It wasn't perfection. It never would be. But it was progress. They finished the exercise, and Marie stood beside him, her hand resting on his back. His fur was still damp with sweat from the effort. But there was something in the way he looked at her. Something that made her heart swell with pride. "You did it," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "I knew you could." Titan's tail wagged slowly, almost shyly, as if acknowledging her praise. But his eyes were soft, filled with a quiet understanding. It was a moment of connection that went beyond words. It wasn't just about the drill or the training. It was about trust, the trust that had been built slowly, piece by piece, over months of hard work and shared struggle. Marie stood there for a moment, taking in the stillness of the moment. The sun was lower now, the sky a soft, fading orange, and she realized something. They had done it. They had risen from the ashes of their pasts together. Titan wasn't the same dog she had found in that alley. Neither was she. Together, they had faced the darkest parts of themselves and come out the other side, stronger and more united than ever. And in that quiet, peaceful moment, Marie knew that no matter what came next, they could handle it, together. Marie and Titan faced the future together, stronger than ever. After overcoming countless obstacles, their bond is now unshakable. Titan, once a broken soul, is now a fully integrated K9 officer, and Marie has become the handler she always wanted to be. Not perfect, but ready for whatever challenges come next. The chapter explores the quiet moments of reflection between them as they move forward, knowing that their journey is far from over, but that they are finally walking it side by side. The emotional resolution comes when they face a new, unexpected challenge in the field, but this time they handle it as a team, one that is whole, healed, and united in trust. This chapter brings the story full circle, showing that healing is a journey, not a destination, and that both Marie and Titan have learned to rise above their pasts. Their journey together is a new beginning, one where both of them are finally free to be who they were meant to be, not defined by their scars, but by the strength they've found in each other. The city was still dark when Marie slipped into her uniform, the familiar weight of it grounding her as she laced up her boots. Titan lay quietly beside the door, his head resting on his paws, his body relaxed but alert. The soft hum of the morning outside had begun to stir, the promise of a new day on the horizon. She glanced at the clock on the wall. It had been months since she had found him that night in the alley, his body broken, his spirit fractured. And now, as she looked at him, she could hardly believe how far they had come. Titan's coat had regained its shine, his body strong and healthy. But it wasn't just his physical transformation that amazed her. It was the way he had learned to trust again, the way he had become more than just a partner to her. He had become family. They had healed together side by side, each of them facing the demons of their pasts and coming through it with a bond stronger than either could have imagined. Marie's heart swelled as she reached down to ruffle Titan's fur. His tail thumped once, then twice in response, his eyes warm and steady as he looked up at her. "Ready?" she asked, her voice soft though the excitement and certainty in her chest were undeniable. Titan's ears perked up, his body language calm but eager. He was ready. The ride to the station was quiet. Marie couldn't help but glance over at Titan as they drove, the early morning light spilling through the windows. His presence in the car felt natural now, the same way her own breath filled the space without thought. She had never imagined that they would make it this far, that they would grow into the team they were now. She had always known Titan had potential, but seeing him in action, working alongside her, had given her a sense of pride she never thought possible. Today would be a new challenge. It always was. The K9 unit had called in their team for a routine search and rescue operation. A missing person in a densely wooded area. Nothing out of the ordinary, but it would be a test nonetheless. A test of how far they had come. A test of everything they had worked for. As they pulled up to the staging area, the rest of the K9 unit was already there, their dogs barking excitedly, ready for action. Marie parked the squad car, stepping out with Titan at her side, his leash loosely hanging in her hand. He was focused, calm, a far cry from the broken dog she had once found. His body was relaxed, his eyes alert but not fearful. They were a team now, not just in training, but in life. "Morning, Thompson," a voice called from behind. It was Officer Davis, the senior K9 officer, a veteran who had seen it all. He smiled at Marie, then gave a quick nod toward Titan. "He looks good. Glad to see he's doing better." Marie nodded back, her smile soft but proud. "He's ready." The team gathered around, prepping for the search. Marie listened intently as the details of the operation were outlined. The location of the missing person, the likely areas they would need to search. Titan stood beside her, his attention fixed on the other dogs, his body tense with anticipation. Marie could feel the bond between them, the silent communication that had developed over the past few months. She didn't need to give him any instructions. She could feel Titan's readiness, his eagerness to prove himself. The search began, and Titan was immediately in his element. His nose to the ground, his movements swift and sure. He was no longer the hesitant dog who had struggled with the simplest commands. He was a professional, confident, focused, and working with a precision that Marie had once thought impossible. They moved through the wooded area, following Titan's lead. The other K9 units spread out, each working with their dogs to cover more ground. But it was Titan who found the trail. He stopped abruptly, his body still, his ears alert. Marie's breath caught in her throat. This was it. This was their moment. "Titan, search," she commanded softly. Titan moved forward, his nose low to the ground, following the scent with determination. Marie followed closely behind, her heart pounding as she watched him work. She could feel the weight of the moment. This was more than just a search. This was Titan's redemption. This was the culmination of everything they had fought for. And then there it was. The missing person lying unconscious but alive, trapped beneath a fallen tree branch. Titan stood over the person, barking sharply, alerting Marie to the location. Marie quickly moved to the person's side, checking for signs of life, and then called for backup. As the paramedics arrived and began to take care of the victim, Marie looked down at Titan. His body was still tense, but his eyes were steady, filled with focus. He had done it. He had completed the mission, and so had she. "Good boy, Titan," Marie whispered, her voice thick with emotion. He looked up at her, his eyes softening, his tail giving a small, satisfied wag. They had done it, together. The sun was fully risen now, casting a warm light over the woods. The day had begun, and with it, a new chapter in their lives. Marie stood tall, Titan by her side, knowing that this was only the beginning of what they could accomplish. They had risen from the ashes of their pasts, both broken, both healing, but both stronger than ever before. Together they were unstoppable. As the sun set on another day, Marie stood beside Titan, the soft glow of dusk casting long shadows across the quiet streets. Their journey had been long, filled with moments of doubt and pain, but now, as she looked down at the dog who had once been broken, she saw only strength. The scars they both carried had shaped them, but they had not defined them. Together, they had built something stronger than either of them had expected, a bond rooted in trust, perseverance, and love. Titan's head rested against her leg, his eyes calm and content as they stood together. There was no longer the same fear in his gaze, no longer the hesitation that had once paralyzed him. The once broken dog was now whole, not because of any miracle, but because they had fought together. Marie ran her hand gently through Titan's fur, feeling the warmth of his body, the steady rhythm of his breath. She had learned to let go of the need for perfection, to embrace the imperfections that made them both who they were. Titan had healed, yes, but so had she. The city around them moved on, indifferent to the quiet moment they shared, but for Marie and Titan, this was enough. The future no longer felt like an uncertain journey. It felt like a promise. One they would keep together, side by side. They had risen from the ashes of their pasts, and now they were ready to face whatever came next. Not as two broken souls, but as a team, strong, whole, and unbreakable. With a final, contented sigh, Marie smiled down at Titan. "We've got this," she whispered softly, her voice filled with certainty. And in that moment, they both knew it was true. The end.